Do the trashy pulp novels of the world have anything to offer? Are bestsellers all they're cracked up to be? Here at Terrible Book Club, we explore whether you really can judge a book by its cover, or its ridiculous synopsis. You ever passed a book and thought, ugh, who's reading this? We probably are.
Hello and welcome to episode 217 of the Terrible Book Club. I am Paris, and this is Chris.
Hello.
This time I read Who Killed the Fonz by James Boice, published in February of 2019. Jesus Christ, that is recent for this subject matter. This was published by Simon & Schuster at the request of... Actually, it wasn't published by
at the
Simon
request
Schuster,
of the Fonz. He's like, please, I need to be brought back into the zeitgeist.
This was published by Simon & Schuster in 2019.
At the request of no one. No one asked for this.
Seriously. Yeah, no one asked for this. I don't... eternal questions. However, I read it today at the request of our patron Fred. Fred wrote to us saying, the sheer notion of a murder mystery with Happy Days characters that is apparently officially sanctioned by whoever owns the rights is enough to give me pause. I can't even find any information about why that book was made, and I just end up asking myself, who is this for? Because, well, I don't doubt that Happy Days still has a large fan base. I don't think many people would want to read a book about how one of the best characters on the show gets murdered. You know, Fred, I was right there with you, and I still am for most of that. Although I will, I'll put in the show notes, I did find a very old podcast episode where the author was interviewed about this book. I have not listened to it yet because I didn't want to poison myself for the episode, but I think that episode may answer your question as to, like, why the fuck did this guy write this? I think he just really likes Happy Days and was, you know, he's a writer, gotta make some money, right? So, anyway, we'll find out together later. If this is your first time listening to the Terrible Book Club, what we do here on this show is read books that we assume will be bad based on their cover, title, summary, or some combination of the three. Sometimes, like today, we read books that our patrons, listeners, or friends recommend. So we typically do the opposite of what most people are doing when they're scrounging around in a bookstore or looking online for something to read. Usually this experiment results in a hilariously disappointing read, but once in a while we do actually end up liking the book, sometimes even loving it on the occasion. In addition to our usual barnyard language, today's episode includes murder, infidelity, and just nostalgia K-holes. Just watch out. If you get into this book, you're just going to fall into like a 50s nostalgia K-hole.
I don't have nostalgia for the 50s, so I think I'll be all set.
Me neither. But this book has nostalgia for really clean family values, which is fine, I guess. There's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, watch out. So before we get into just the meat of today's episode, we've got some updates and some apologies for you from the hosts.
What am I apologizing for? Hold on.
I have an apology for all of you. So over the entire history of this show, I feel like there were several times where we would be talking about something and we'd be referencing other media, and I would say something to the effect of, oh yeah, I really liked the American Gods TV series. It's so great. It was one of the best shows I ever saw. Well, I decided to rewatch it with my partner this year because he had never seen it, and I was like, oh yeah, it's really great. And then we rewatched it, and I was like, the show is not great. I'm so sorry. I don't know why I had this like very rosy memory of it. I think because I was thinking back to when I saw this, and it was a very dark time in my life when I hated where I lived. I was like using sketchy websites to access the show because I couldn't afford like streaming site. I don't know. It was just a bad time. So I think maybe that altered my conception of the
You're just
show.
letting anything in. You're like, this is not immediate pain. It's fine. I
Yeah.
like it.
Secondly, I only saw the first 2 seasons, and I never knew there was a third. So, like, that's a whole other complication. It had a lot of cool elements, but I don't really know that it stands up. Like, I don't think it's horrible, but it certainly is not what I purported it to be. So apologies, listeners. American Gods is not the best thing since sliced streaming or whatever. Sorry.
Okay.
Also, here's,
An apology that no one was looking for or expecting.
and like, I
At
also
the beginning of this
decided,
episode, that's not about American Gods or Neil Gaiman at all.
we decided to rewatch this like right before the story broke about Neil Gaiman being a sex pest and like human trafficker or whatever, whatever alleged things are happening over there. So I'm just like watching this with my partner being like, oh man, we started it, so maybe it gets better. And it was just
Okay, Paris. Well, I guess, I should apologize too. When I was in 7th grade, I really liked corn, and I don't like corn anymore. So I'm sorry to everyone that I liked corn before, and the corn is not good.
Yeah, but you haven't been on the show recommending corn albums enthusiastically for the last 10 years. Whereas I know that I've mentioned American Gods more than once. So anyway, not terrible, but it's not great. It's not one of the best TV shows I've ever seen. I think it was just a bad time in my life, and I latched onto something that was not painful. So,
okay.
Apologies.
We're glad we got that out of the way. We can get to the book you read.
Yeah. All right. So this is the sort of back of the book summary. This is, what you're seeing when the author or the publisher wants to reel you in to buy their book. Late October, 1984. Prince and Bruce are dominating FM radio. Ron and Nancy are headed back to the White House. And Richard Cunningham is having a really bad Sunday. First, there's the meeting with his agent. A decade ago, the 40-something Cunningham was one of Hollywood's hottest screenwriters. And now, Tinseltown is no longer interested in his artsy, introspective scripts. They want Terminator cyborgs and exploding Stay Puft Marshmallow Men. Then, later that same day, Richard gets a phone call with even worse news. His best friend from childhood back in Milwaukee is dead. Arthur Fonzarelli, the Fonz. He lost control of his motorcycle while crossing a bridge and plummeted into the water below. 2 days of searching, and still no body, no trace of his trademark leather jacket, and Richard suspects murder. With the help of his old pals Ralph Malf and Potsy Weber, he sets out to catch the killer. Who Killed the Fonz imagines what happened to the characters of the legendary TV show Happy Days 20 years after the series left off. And while much has changed in the interim, goodbye drive-in movie theaters, hello VCRs, the story centers around the same timeless themes as the show: the meaning of family, the significance of friendship, the importance of community. You want to read that, guys? Sound good?
Sure. I mean, I have zero context for Happy Days. The only thing I know about Happy Days is that Henry Winkler and Ron Howard were in it. So there's references to it in Arrested Development that mostly went over my head. That's all I know about Happy Days. Also, the jump the shark thing is from Happy Days because the Fonz jumps over a shark with a motorcycle, and that's when people say, oh, the show started sucking after that.
What's funny is they talk about that in like one of the nostalgia passages, and I was like, why the fuck does this matter to the story? And I actually did not know that phrase originated from that scene or that episode of the show. So I learned something today. Thank you, Chris.
There you go.
Yeah. I similarly have no relationship with Happy Days beyond what Chris stated. Like, I know that Henry Winkler and
Ron
Howard, thank you. I know they were both in it, and that sort of like launched their careers. Is that right? I don't know. I mean, that's just sort of the impression I had. And I never, and then I guess the other connection I make is like, when we were kids, they made that 70s show, which kind of felt like the early 2000s version of like Happy Day. Like they tried to make it like that. Like, hey, remember 20 years ago or 30 years ago, which was sort of what, Happy Days was like. So I've always thought about it that way. Like, I don't know. So anyway, I never saw it. I don't have any relationship with any of these characters. So, all right. So our characters and setting here. Our setting is hyper specific. We are in the last week of October of 1984. We start in LA. We end in Milwaukee. Our characters are Richie Cunningham, our quote unquote detective of sorts in this noir setting. Ralph Melf and Potsy Weber are sort of, thing one, thing two, little sidekicks to Richie who don't really matter at all, actually. Arthur the Fonzarelli, our body in this noir story, and Richie's childhood best friend. Martin Seelock, the candidate for governor of Michigan in the upcoming election. Margot Seelock, his wife. We've got Lieutenant Kirk and Officer Sauer, local Milwaukee police. There are other characters I don't think they're worth talking about because they don't matter to the story. I will say, while I was reading this, since this was like a 1980s noir, I just kind of exclusively listened to several Perturbator records for the right mood, which wasn't really the right mood because this book was more wholesome than I think Perturbator record is. But it was... it was close.
Doesn't really hit the Happy Days thing that well. Doesn't even hit like the wholesome noir. What is wholesome noir, though?
You're about to find out. You're about to find out.
She walked in like a tall drink of water, and she was like, "Would you like a drink of water? Because you should be hydrated."
I am going to read my summary of the events of the book. It's a little long today, but it is broken up into sensible chunks. We're taking sensible bites out of this meaty story steak. All right. They are broken up into specific days. So every section will be prefaced by telling you what the day of the week and the date is.
Are they happy? Are they all happy days?
No, they're actually pretty shitty days. All things told.
Shitty days. Monday, Sunday, shitty days. Tuesday, Wednesday, shitty days.
Yep. Until finally the weekend comes. All right. Sunday, October 28th. It's the last week of October 1984, and Richie Cunningham is washed up from the successful filmmaking career he had barely begun to build in the 70s with his accidental indie hit Sorority Slaughterhouse and his intentional indie hit Welcome to Henderson County. Having little to no film work the last few years, his agent, Gleb Cooper, gives him an ultimatum. Take a job working on Space Battles, the nice brand Star Wars, now with tits, and give up his dream of turning Cormac McCarthy's Suitry into a film, or Glenn dumps him as a client, cutting off his access to any work at all. His Sunday gets even worse.
Listen,
when
man,
he returns...
you're filming these space bazongas if I have to say anything about it.
Yep. Hey, that's where the money is, in the space bazongas, I guess. His Sunday gets even worse when he returns home from this meeting to his wife and mother giving him the news that the Fonz, his estranged but still beloved childhood best friend, is presumed dead after a motorcycle accident on one of Milwaukee's bridges over waters that connect to Lake Michigan. What's even worse is that the body still hasn't been recovered from the water. Monday, October 29th. Richard flies back home to Milwaukee to go to Fonzie's memorial service, staying at his childhood home while he's in town. While there, he reminisces about Fonzie through recounting Happy Days episodes and considers his own fleeting youth and appreciation for his parents. The memorial service attendees are mostly women Fonzie has fucked over the course of his life, which tells us how he was at least an honest womanizer because no woman would attend a fuckboy's funeral, at least according to Richard's internal monologue.
Again, listen, that is like a standing ovation of fuckboyism if I've ever heard it, right? Like, man, he was around town with everyone, but I gotta go to the funeral. He was just so nice. He was just such a decent dude.
So upfront about it. So upfront.
It can happen to you, womanizers.
If only. While at the service, he sees childhood friends Potsy and Ralph and meets Martin Seelock, current candidate for governor, along with his wife, Margot, who seems especially despondent at Fonzie's passing, which immediately made me think she was fucking him and her husband killed him for it. But, we'll get to that later. It turns out Fonzie was the gubernatorial candidate's mechanic, and what do you know? He needs one last TV ad 1 week before the election to push him ahead of his competition, and he loved Welcome to Henderson County. So he offers Richard a job on the spot at the memorial service to create this commercial in 2 days. Golly gee, what luck. Richard heads to the diner that they all went to as kids and runs into Potsy and Ralph again, where yet more reminiscing and recounting of Happy Days episodes happens. Richard claims he told Spielberg one of these stories and that it was in the original script for Jaws, but was cut to finance the mechanical shark. This is the jumping the shark thing that you were talking about. I didn't realize the significance.
Oh, he was like, I told him that he should like have someone jump over Jaws in a motorcycle, and Spielberg was like, but why would I do, like, why?
and they ended up cutting it just to finance the shark, right? To impress them further, he insinuates that he's working on the next Star Wars film instead of Galaxy Boobs or whatever. The circle jerk continues when Potsy and Ralph reveal they've reformed
a long time ago in a chest very close to your face.
In a bra, very close. The circle jerk continues when Potsy and Ralph reveal they've reformed their band, Men Who Work, and are better than Springsteen, so they're going to record a demo and send it to some labels to make it big.
Okay. Men Who Work seems like a really weird, like, sideways punch. Like, we also have jobs, okay? That's why we're not as good.
Well, you see, we're in Milwaukee, and everything's about the working man, which is going to be an important point. The Sealocks call to invite Richard to their house the next morning to discuss the commercial. Richard calls his wife,
All right,
Lori Beth,
picture this.
to tell her,
there's a shark. I'm on a motorcycle. And Richard's like...
The shark is on a motorcycle.
Like, he's jumping me.
Okay. Richard calls his wife, Lori Beth, to tell her that he's staying 1 or 2 more days to write and shoot the commercial and changes his flight accordingly. Tuesday, October 30th. Richard goes to the meeting at the Sealocks mansion in the fancy neighborhood of town where they work on content ideas for the commercial. Richard then meets up with Potsy and Ralph at Al's Diner, and they suggest he shoot the commercial at the Sackett Wilhelm factory at which they both work, since Sealocks' campaign is all about men who work, coincidentally. He heads to
Not
the
the women who work.
Nope, just the men. He heads to the diner's bathroom, and some guy named TJ has scrawled, "Sit on it," underneath the RIP message for Fonzie that Richard had written in there a day earlier, which kind of pisses him off. On his way home, he sees someone driving around on a bike that looks exactly like Fonzie's, but Richard rationalizes it as him missing his friend and looking for pieces of him out in the world. Wednesday, October 31st, Halloween. They shoot the commercial at the factory with Richard in both the writer and director's chair, giving him the directing experience he needs to enhance his failing career. Richard discovers that the crew Sealock sent him are all young 20-somethings who love Sorority Slaughterhouse, so they're stoked to work with him. They shoot all day, and he actually feels talented and accomplished after a full day of directing and editing. By the end of this chapter, we are halfway through the book, and there is no mystery at all yet, so somehow that's all going to fit into the second act, I guess.
We had to really reminisce about all the Happy Days episodes before we got to the actual plot.
All right, so I had to break up Thursday, November 1st into day and night because it was so fucking long. He really just...
Oh, this is where things happen.
The whole thing, the whole, like, detective story really just only happens, like, in the latter half, the last 100 pages of the book. So, Thursday, November 1st, daytime. Richard hand-delivers the commercial to each of the 3 local TV stations for them to watch and approve before confirming that they'll air it during Friday night primetime, because it's 1984, and that was the way to do it. On his way back home, he notices that what looks like Fonzie's wrecked bike is behind the barbed wire fence of TJ's Auto Parts and Salvage, so he stops to check it out. TJ comes out to greet him, and it turns out he was also a friend of Fonzie's and got Fonzie's bike after the accident because no one came to claim it. Richard asks him about the shitty message left in the diner bathroom, and TJ has no idea what he's talking about, so Richard thinks to himself that someone else must have left it as a clue, so he would look for TJ and find Fonzie's bike.
He wrote "sit on it" as a clue? Listen, you gotta sit on it. You know what it is, right? Yeah, just find it and sit on it.
TJ mentions that Fonzie was in the best mood he had ever seen for the last few months of his life, until the final week before he died, where he was morose and barely talked. As they're looking at the bike, Richard realizes that "sit on it" could have actually been a suggestion to sit on Fonzie's bike, rather than a 1950s insult, so he does.
Uh-huh.
It falls over, but when he and TJ pick it back up, Richard notices that there's blue paint on the rear fender where it looks like something hit the bike from behind. Why sitting on the bike would reveal this is a mystery to me, but, you know.
I think look at it. Look at the back, actually. Look at the back rear of the bike would have been a much better clue than sit on it. Because when you're sitting on it, it's actually really hard to see the back of the bike.
Right. He's concerned enough that he goes to see Lieutenant Kirk and ask him about it. Kirk explains that the guardrail on the bridge that Fonzie fell off of is also painted blue, and that the bike could have spun and gotten the back smashed before falling off. Richard asks if they tested the paint to see if it was a match for the guardrail, and Kirk gives him a smartass answer about not having enough resources to do so. He basically tells Richard to fuck off, that he hates him and his friends, and that Fonzie deserved to die.
I saw him jump that shark. It wasn't cool. Should have ate him.
Yeah. Richard is escorted out of the station, but not before friendly Officer Sauer explains that Kirk doesn't want Seelock to win the election because he wants to shake up the police department. Richard decides to go to Seelock's house to ask for his help in what he believes is a cover-up by Kirk of how Fonzie truly died on that bridge. Seelock agrees with Richard that Kirk is suspicious, confirming our first red herring suspect in the tale. Seelock encourages Richard to go to the crime scene to look for more evidence later when it's dark and there's less traffic, which is totally a normal and reasonable thing to suggest, and definitely not Seelock trying to kill him, too. Thursday night. Almost immediately after arriving at the crash site, in the dark, kindly Officer Sauer from earlier swings by and says he's been looking for Richard because Kirk thought about what he had said more deeply and agrees more investigation.
So he went to the crash site to find him?
Yep.
I thought you'd be sitting on it out here, so I thought I'd come by.
The officer offers to take Richard back to the police station to talk to Kirk again. Just as they're about to get in the car, Richard notices that the officer's cruiser has a hammered-out dent along the stripe on the car, the blue stripe on the car. The officer notices Richard's eye and begins to arrest him when suddenly Fonzie appears to menace the officer with his headlights and waves for Richard to get on the bike. He does, and they ride off into the night as Officer Sauer wildly fires at them.
Wait a minute, hold on. The Fonz shows up and just shines a light on the officer, and he lets...
Like his bike headlights. Like he shows up and he's like, roar, and the headlights are...
And the
really
officer is frightened and scared by the headlights, and he's like, you better go with the Fonz, but then also shoots at them?
No, I think he's blinded, and in that moment, Richard runs to the bike, and then when he kind of regains his sight, he starts shooting at them as they drive away.
Understood.
They arrive at a cabin in the woods where Fonzie removes his helmet to reveal he is actually Margot Seelock. Gasp!
Oh my God.
At the cabin, Margot explains that she is a child of the Schatz brewing empire and weaves the tale of how Martin Seelock had orchestrated their entire relationship with cold calculation from the time he was 18 because he wanted to marry into a rich family with political ties. Margot, unfortunately, didn't figure this out until after they had already married and he had begun having affairs. Years later, Margot and Fonzie fall in love, and they had been in love for the last 2 years because she saw him he fixed her car, and she saw him once and fell in love with him and then started hanging out in the garage.
And everything changed after that.
Yep, that was it. So anyway, he teaches her about cars and motorcycles and taught her to ride. She was the most free she had ever been, and Fonzie was in love with a woman for the first time in his life.
No one's ever sat on it. Like, I'm sorry that I keep coming back to that, but it's just so good.
No, please do. Please, sit on it. Please. After
sit on that joke.
She eventually tells him about how terrible Martin is, so terrible that he made a deal to let the Sackett-Wilhelm factory abandon Milwaukee and go overseas with their jobs a year after he gets elected in exchange for a $5 million campaign contribution, despite running his entire campaign on keeping the factory in town. Fonzie is disgusted by this and immediately confronts Martin, saying he'll go to the Milwaukee Journal with the story the next day unless Martin reveals his devious plan on live TV. Naturally, he instead orders Fonzie's murder.
No, you don't do that. You better reveal that shit on live TV or else I'm going to the cops is the fastest way to sign your death certificate.
Yeah, seriously. Margot reveals that she was the one who left Richard the sit-on-it note signed TJ in the bathroom at the diner. Margot remembered Fonzie's stories about Richie and thought he was her only hope, so she figured she could direct him towards the bike and he would find a clue, maybe. Richard meets up with Potsy and Ralph and then calls Seelock to set up a blackmail meet. Seelock meets him with $1 million, or Fonzie goes to the media like he originally wanted, while Richard records the meet as evidence of his corruption. Friday, November 2nd. We are finally at Friday. That was all Thursday.
Wow.
The meet happens at a Green Bay Packers-themed motel, but it is, of course, a double cross. Seelock brings $1 million check, but also has a gagged Margot in tow. Officer Sauer had run the plates and title on Margot's motorcycle, which traced back to her and Fonzie, so Seelock learned of their affair and decided he wanted to frame Richard for it to make him look sympathetic for the election. He ties them both to the motel bed and cooks up 2 hot shots so they will appear to have OD'd in bed together. Potsy and Ralph start yelling in the adjacent room with the recording equipment, which alerts Seelock, and they also end up tied up and queued for murder.
Damn.
Seelock destroys the tape, too. Just as he's about to inject Richie, the Fonz bursts in the door and says, "Hey!" while finger gunning and real gunning. That literally happens. I am not exaggerating.
I'm here to sit on it. On you, Seelock, forever.
He unspools the past week of his activity in a hero monologue. You see, he intentionally wrecked his bike when Sauer hit him on the bridge because he knew if he didn't pretend to be dead, they'd keep coming for him. He reveals that he has successfully hidden over the last week through a perverse underground railroad whereby all of his ex-girlfriends have provided him cover and lodging while also operating as a network of spies and contacts to help him gather evidence against Seelock.
This is incredible fuckboyery, man.
Yeah. Lieutenant Kirk and the rest of the police arrive. Seelock tries to kill himself with one of the hot shots, but he becomes so enraptured by his own ad playing on TV that he instead stops, stands up, and claps, and consequently is arrested.
Put those clapping hands behind your back.
The weekend comes. They have a party for Fonzie at the diner where Men Who Work are playing a cover of Separate Ways by Journey. Margot offers to finance Richie's $5 million suitry film, so Richie calls Gleb and tells him he's not taking the job on space battles. Margot and Fonzie decide to move to LA to be near Richie and to raise Margot's son in a new place to forsake his father's shitty legacy. The end.
And everyone sat on it happily ever after.
Yep. There you go, Chris.
Wow. Incredible.
What'd you think?
I mean, it sounds like a fun little romp there. This smacks to me of the Obama-Biden mystery book that we read. Like, it's in the same vein of here's some memorable people from the past, and now they're a mystery solving duo. Although there wasn't a duo here, it was just Ron Howard.
It really is that same genre. So I guess if you liked that book, you might like this. But all right. Any questions, Chris? Anything? Ask?
Surprisingly, I feel like that was a neat little bow there for the most part. So no.
All right, great. All right, then I am going to get into the rubric. So let's first talk about technical construction. So there were very, very few typos. This was professionally edited, and I will say not with the careless fervor that a lot of mass market work has been edited the last couple of years. It was like really well done. So, Simon & Schuster, you got it going on in the editing department, I guess. Formatting, honestly, I know if you've listened to the show before, you know how much I hate the way people title chapters and section things sometimes. I really liked this. I thought it was funny and thematically appropriate, where he went with the days of the week from the theme song. And it also just works for an 80s noir, because usually when you're following a detective story, you are paying attention to like the days of the week and the dates, because usually it has, usually that tells you something about where people are or like how the case is progressing. So I actually really liked this. I thought it was really effective, having the sections titled by the day rather than chapters with like stupid little titles, So I actually really liked this. This was sectioning that I enjoyed.
Wow.
The formatting was good. Punctuation was perfect, no notes. And in terms of cover and art direction, someone was hired, and I think this image works for the intended like population and subject matter. It's just like an unzipped jacket, with big font. It looks fine. No issues there. So technical constructions, easy one, man. This is like, if I could give it more than one, I would. All right, plot construction is where things fall apart. So let's talk about plot construction. Okay, general coherence. Like, this is a pretty classic formula for like an 80s, 90s noir, especially like a TV show, if we're thinking that way. So many of these scenes I pictured through a Twin Peaks filter. Like, I can imagine Margot Seelock taking off her hat and like an Angelo Badalamenti score like rising in the background. It's just like, it has that sort of vibe. It's not like the most coherent thing out there, though. okay, so let's talk about some stuff which I guess we already touched on in the summary, but writing messages above toilets in the hope that the right person will read it and know what you're talking about is like real absurd to me. I don't get that.
With advice that doesn't necessarily even point to the thing that you want them to sit on or where you want them to look while being sat on it, and also sitting on it actually takes your eye away from the blue paint evidence. Does she know about the blue paint?
Well, she knows that that Officer Sauer is the one who tried to run, or she suspects that Sauer is the one who tried to run him off the bridge. So I don't, even still, it's like, I don't know. Actually, sorry, she didn't know about the paint. She hoped that there would be a clue on the bike. She didn't even know there was a clue on the bike. So
you're just like generally sit on things until you find out something. I know Richard will go sit on everything until he finds a clue. That's just how he is.
I mean, the strange thing is that she had 2 opportunities to talk to him privately in situations where it would have been plausible for them to be talking about something else. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's just like she's so afraid of her husband, she can't risk it. But
why would he be suspicious of her talking to Richard Cunningham, though? Right.
Leave a note at his house. Just drop it off in the door and be like, yo, I think this is what happened. Don't sign it. Like, give him actual details. Yeah, it just seems overly cryptic and indirect, for no reason. The whole idea that Fonzie had to die because him talking to the Milwaukee Journal a month before the election would have Seelock lose the election. It's like, look, I know Fonzie was well known amongst a group of people in Milwaukee, but did he have like such weight and renown to be able to destroy a mayoral candidate this way? I mean,
what evidence did he have?
That's the thing. At the time, he didn't have any evidence. He was just going to tell the Journal. By the end of the story, he gathers evidence through, his like Whisper X network or whatever. But earlier, he doesn't have that evidence. So yeah, I guess he would tell the Journal and the Journal would do, the investigative legwork perhaps. But I also was thinking, like, I feel like with politicians, usually the order of operations is like bribery, blackmail, then murder. You usually don't jump like right to killing the person before anything even happens.
Yeah, he could have just paid off the Fonz, right?
Or blackmail, or tried to blackmail him or anything. Like, no, just immediately to murder within hours. So, I'm not saying it's not possible, but it does seem a little extreme for the circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
Also, like, the biggest issue here is people arrive and behave at just the right time in the latter half of the book, and it's pretty, like, eye-roll inducing. Margot shows up to rescue Richie right in time. The Fonz shows up to rescue Richie right in time. And the villain behaving so villainy and narcissistic that he gets arrested instead of killing himself. It's just too many, like, coincidences for me. But this does feel exactly like the TV show it's spinning off from. So I think that's what Boice was going for, even if I don't like it. So it's a little tough there, because it's like, well, this isn't really something I want, but it seemed like he was creating this very hyper-specific art form in this mold, and he did that. I just find this stuff silly,
Mm-hmm.
In terms of rules following, there's some dumb shit, like, we have to constantly weave in side characters from the show and famous people references more often than I feel is reasonable. So, like, there's a point where Richie's driving in LA and he almost hits Axl Rose and Slash. And they're like, hey, buddy, be careful. We're putting a fire.
And Slash is like, do-do-do-do-do-do-do, like driving away.
And then, at the beginning, he's like, yeah, I came up with, like, Scorsese and Spielberg and Lucas. It's like, do we need to say that? It's just weird. And
he went to George Lucas, and Lucas was like, I don't know about this Space Bazongas thing, man.
Yeah. And then, in terms of integrating side characters, like, honestly, Potsy and Motzi, or Potsy and Ralph or whatever, they're just so unimportant. They're a vehicle for more reminiscing, to talk about more fucking Happy Days episode segments. And they're a way for Richard to decide to shoot the commercial at the factory, but I feel like that idea could have come from elsewhere. And then lastly, they are how he has, like, the recording equipment to record the blackmail meet with Sealock, but I mean, I feel like you could just have a tape recorder. Like, I don't know. It just felt
and Richard
like
Cunningham, the director, has no recording equipment.
Right. He has no idea what to do. Yeah, so
they had to go back to Axel and Slash and actually, like, I'm sorry I almost hit you, but can we borrow the studio to record some political malfeasance?
No, but that's a great point, and so it felt like those two characters just didn't need to be here, especially because there's enough reminiscing about Happy Days episodes, like just by Richie in his own head. Like, I don't feel like those two guys really needed to be here. Same thing with, like, including Al, the diner owner. Like, gonna have a segment with him, and they have to keep going back to the diner like they did in the show. And then Lieutenant Kirk, I get that so from what I understand, he was sort of Fonzie's, like, arch nemesis and was always, like, hassling the kids. But in the book, he is still on the force and still such an asshole that he's ticketing and towing cars at Fonzie's funeral. So deep is his hatred.
Listen, you're always on the clock.
So by the end, of course, he's like, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't see that Sauer was a criminal. Like, obviously, like, I was wrong about, what I said. Fonzie, I don't think Fonzie deserved to die. Like, and so they kind of make up, but, like, ticketing and towing cars at a funeral is, like, another level of asshole that just seems absurd more than, like, plausible. So, yeah, so some weird stuff there. Character quality, this is actually a part of the book that I think is outstanding, I would even say. I think the important characters like Richie and Margot are actually pretty well crafted. Most of the accessory people are just sort of set dressing. Although some of them have some good descriptions, like Richie's mom, which I'll read in a little bit. But, in a book this short for this purpose, I'm not too bothered by all the accessory characters not getting a lot of depth, since we spend the most time with Richie and we get a lot of deep description there. So I'm just going to read a couple passages. I'm going to read a couple for Richie and a couple for Margot, and then I'll just give you the fun one about his mom, because I thought the description of the mom was pretty good. All right, so first one for Richie, we're going to go to page 6. Richard did not know why this character was so appealing to him. Because with Richard's sports car and slick suits and Spanish colonial in Sherman Oaks with a pool and detached mother-in-law bungalow in back, he and Sutri would not seem to have a lot in common. He certainly wasn't a drinker like Sutri. In fact, he rarely drank. Not since one night long ago when he was a young father and the pressure got to him. He took it too far that night and never made that mistake again. But that wasn't made the book so powerful. It was a kind of art he had never encountered before. The kind that would seem to have nothing to do with you, but still gets to you in ways art that has everything to do with you does not. Just a good section of, like, Richard thinking about this book, the Sutri book, and, like, why it mattered to him.
Mm-hmm.
All right, gonna hop over to page 33 real quick. He stood in the driveway of 565 North Clinton Drive, taking his suitcase from the trunk. His childhood home looked the same, just with different color shutters, window trim, and garage door. Like his high school, which he had passed on the way, it seemed smaller, more modest than he remembered. The trees lining the street, though, were much bigger. Their trunks were massive, and their bark weathered and thick. Their colorful but steadily fading tops reached across the street to almost mingle with those reaching from the other side. Not clocks and calendars, he thought, but trees are what best show the passage of time. Richard could almost see his father pulling up the street in his DeSoto after another long day at Cunningham Hardware. He could almost see his mother inside through the kitchen window, waving to him, beef stew or rump roast ready on the table. He had been so young when he had been in high school, he realized now. She had been only, 40? That was younger than he was now. His father, too. Back then, to a teenager, they seemed so powerful and flawless, exempt from all laws of human nature. Now he could see that they were only making it up as they went along and holding their breath, trying not to panic, doing their best to do what was best. It made his heart hurt with a new degree of love for those sweet people who probably weren't nearly as assured as they had seemed to him at the time, who in fact were most likely flailing around in their own heads about what to do in the situations their kid put them in. All right, and one last one over on 45. Richard stepped outside. The cool, fresh air tasted good after the air inside. Hot from the crowd, sour from the animosity of jilted old friends, repressive all around. He would have stayed longer if not for Potsy and Ralph. What could he do to make them see he wasn't as cold-hearted as they had made him out to be in their minds over all these years? How could he shatter that mythical version of him they had created? How could he become their friend again? Yeah, I just think the times when we're in Richie's head, we get a really nice, nuanced, thoughtful display, of what his mind is like.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to read a couple of passages from Margot, just because I think her characterization is pretty good. Margot Seelock opened the door. "Richard," she said, smiling. She was wearing a gray turtleneck sweater and green pants and was barefoot. She smelled good, and he felt at ease at once. He stepped into a vaulted foyer where an imposing staircase curved up to an upper floor. She welcomed him, took his coat, a Green Bay Packers parka he found in Chachi's closet, and asked him if he found the place okay. Fretted when he told her he missed his exit and had to turn around. She led him into the house, talking over her shoulder to him. "Oh, we can't thank you enough for doing this. I know how busy you must be." She offered him water, coffee, gave him a clearly oft-given tour of the house, its history and trivia. The wood for this doorframe came from the hull of a sunken ship off the coast of Newfoundland. She was assured and sharp, a smiling conversationalist who, aside from her severe hair, presented herself conservatively as the astute, dynamic wife of a Midwestern public official. She had that skill a lot of actresses had that made him feel like he had known her longer than he had, that could have almost convinced him they had more in common than they did. I think it's a really good description of a woman like that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and then one more of Margot much later in the book when, we kind of get the reveal and she's giving Richie the real story of what happened between her and Fonz. Her voice was plain and worn out. The last time he had seen her, she had seemed tired, but now her voice was completely stripped of all its full-throated richness and musicality. All of her warmth was gone, replaced by focused rage. She came over against the table. Behind her, the fire grew quickly into bright, wild orange flames. Her normally perfectly styled hair was tangled and matted on her head. She wore no makeup. Gone was the straight posture, the eager graciousness. She was boiling with resolve. Her eyes were seeing Richard, seeing behind him and through him, within him, seeing what she was going to say to him. She smelled like gasoline and leather and cold air. She went to the record player, squatted before the albums, and began sorting through them. He watched the side of her face. It was hard to believe there had ever been a smile on it. She seemed to be listening to something in her ear, an irritating sound. Her eyes blinked rapidly. She sucked on her lips. She breathed heavily, impatiently, like breathing itself was an unjust obligation. He watched her shoulder blades move beneath the fabric of her shirt, the muscles on the backs of her arms. Who the hell was this woman? Yeah, so I think even in those short pieces, you get a really good sense of who these people are and what they're like.
Yeah.
I just think
it's
that
decently written.
Yeah, right? For such a schlocky book, the writing was pretty excellent. Oh, right, and I'll read the last fun description about Richie's mother, Marion, who does not matter to the story, but right at the beginning, we get a pretty good description of her, and I just thought, even though it doesn't really matter, it was a good example of one of the accessory characters being really well crafted.
Nice.
After more than a decade in Los Angeles, Marion Cunningham had developed a passion for crystals, star charts, and yoga. She had stopped cutting and coloring her hair after her friends at the Holistic Health Spa had told her that it was where her life force was stored, and that toxins from the chemicals in hair dye could seep into the scalp and blood. They tried to convince her about reincarnation, but she couldn't be sold, though she did believe it was a beautiful concept she wished was true. Mostly, she was fanatical about her macrobiotic vegetarian diet. She was not allowed to cook for Richard and Lori Beth because they couldn't stand all that tofu and raw alfalfa, but when her grandkids were home, she would cook anything they wanted, even meat. It was fine with Richard that she'd become so earthy and non-materialistic. In her former life as a Milwaukee homemaker, when her days were spent chopping food and sweeping floors and carrying around children and propping herself up, she had taught herself to live without wanting more. But walking into the house in Sherman Oaks, he was in no mood to receive a lecture on how Mercury being in retrograde caused the meeting with Gleb to go badly. Anyway, I don't know. I just that was a little description of her. It really gives you a nice explanation of how different she is from what you might remember from the show if you had ever seen it. Yeah, so character quality was actually pretty great for the main characters, I think. But yeah, the plot structure and stuff was kind of bunk. So let's say a 0. Let's give it a 0 for that.
Okay. All right.
All right, moment to moment. So in terms of prose quality and dialogue, honestly, it's damn good. Like, the prose quality is damn good. Like, I might even say this was beautifully written, especially when it comes to, as I pointed out before, like Richie's introspection and the characterizations we get for him and Margot. I'm just going to read 2 more sections so you can kind of get a feel for some of the other parts of the writing. He had been browsing the bargain bins when he came across a remainder copy of a bizarre-looking novel. Black dust jacket, no art, just the title and author's name in big, elaborate font that seemed taken off the side of a 19th century circus wagon. It was the black and white author photo that most intrigued Richard. Most of them posed very self-seriously, bloodless Ivy Leaguers in tweed. This one, however, named Cormac McCarthy, wore jeans, denim jacket, had uncombed hair. The look on his face was surprised, like someone had shouted his name and snapped his photo when he turned around. He looked like he couldn't figure out what he was doing on the back of a book jacket. In the background, there was not a prestigious college campus or the slick Manhattan skyline, but an industrial town. Smokestacks, a bridge, a shipping channel. It looked like the same kind of town Richard had come from. He took the book to the register. The clerk gave him an approving nod, a good sign. That night at home, he started reading. He could not stop. 3 days later, he was still reading. He would have finished the book sooner, but the language was like nothing he had ever seen outside of Shakespeare. It was almost something physical to grapple with. He kept having to put the book down and reach for the dictionary, concatenate, leptosome, electuary. They were not even words, they were portals to new worlds. Thought that description of him getting into the Sutri book was really great.
Yeah.
Felt very relatable as someone who reads a lot of books. All right, and then we're going to hop over to just sort of a scene setting description that I thought was particularly good. He's pretty good at doing that as well. Richard took a calm air red-eye out of Burbank into General Mitchell. Walking from the gate to the rental car counter, he had the feeling of standing out, being the center of unwanted attention. It might have been the grief. He could feel it all over himself, like a stink. But it also might have been something else. The people around him were dressed in the prevailing Wisconsin fashion of flannel shirts, work boots, and camouflage hunting jackets. Passing him in the terminal in the opposite direction, their eyes fell on him, and they stared at him with no expression, taking him in like he was an unfunny joke. It made him conscious of what he was wearing. He had not even thought about the Armani blazer and trousers. He was pulling them from his closet in a hurry on his way out the door. Maybe it was the Bruno Magli loafers they didn't like, but it was not just the clothes he wore or the way he had his Wayfarers hooked in the neck of his shirt, and it was not just his tan, which was hard to avoid when he lived where he did. It was him. There was something about who he was, who he had become, he thought, that did not sit well with these people. He had forgotten how much they valued the humble and low-key here. He kept that in mind with his choice of rental car. A Ford Tempo in riveting brown. So, another great, scene setting and a little bit of, Richie's thoughts. Yeah, I think for dialogue, this is a TV spin-off book, so there are occasions where the dialogue is a little cliche, but honestly, it's fairly natural throughout the book. So I would give this a 1 for moment to moment.
Damn. Yeah, that's a lot of really good examples. It kind of makes me want to read it.
Yeah, so this is... Anyway, sorry, we'll talk about that in a minute. Let's get through Terubal's presence. All right, in terms of chaos levels, I think just the idea that someone wrote and published this in 2019 certainly made me feel a bit wavery. And in terms of levels, that none of it was confusing. I will say it was all very
really just
clearly
the
constructed.
Concept.
Yeah. And then there were no please help moments. So I would say Terubal's presence, we can give this a 1 because it's mostly fine. Actually, take that back. I'm going to give Terubal's presence a 0 because the premise is so bizarre. I think this is a point.
Wow. Okay. Retracted.
Should this exist? Would readers of this genre enjoy this? I mean, maybe. You'd have to be a hardcore Happy Days fan or be desperate in an airport or really into...
It's the only book on the shelf. It's the last one.
Well, what's tempting about this is it's only 200 pages. It's a real quick, short book. So I could see people picking it up for that reason, since a lot of airport books tend to be a bit longer. I mean, like you pointed out, Chris, I think maybe if you're into these sort of celebrity pop culture, tinged books, you might be into this. Maybe. Do I feel as if the author's goal was met? Absolutely. This dude set out what he wanted to do and did it. He did it. Does it add anything new, interesting, or novel? I mean, I guess by filling this bizarre niche, kind of, and by writing
and sort of like doing a serious, maybe not totally serious, but like trying to get in the heads of sitcom characters with a little more depth.
Yeah, and it's like you're writing something that's rather schlocky, but still giving us some beautiful writing and emotional depth. That was real whiplashy for me. I was like, I hate this, but the writing is so good. Like, did it take something from us? No, this is a pretty easy read. Didn't hurt me. What should someone read instead of this? After reading this, I gotta say, I am interested in reading more of Boice's stuff. Maybe he has a book called The Shooting, which sounds far more interesting and relates to things I care about more, rather than Happy Days, which is something I give zero negative fucks about, actually. Absolutely.
Give them back. Give me my fucks back.
Seriously. But yeah, I mean, just his writing was so... Like, the writing in this was so much better than I was expecting that, yeah, I definitely want to check out one of his other books. I just feel like like you said, sort of the concept and this whole idea of, like, I'm going to write a book that's like a formulaic TV show is, like, very not for me. And then that the TV show is Happy Days makes it so not for me. It's like another galaxy,
Far, far away with some boobs.
Yeah, but I could see really enjoying Boice's writing if it was about anything else. All right, can we fix it? Yeah, I mean,
wait, Paris, you have to score before you go to Ken. We do this all the time now.
This is just your job, Chris.
Okay.
All right.
It's 1 for technical construction. It's 0 for plot. It's 1 for moment to moment. It was 0 for Terriblo's presence. Yep. And I believe it was 1 for Should This Exist?
Oh, I actually didn't score that. I would say it's a 0 for Should This Exist.
Okay. 2 out of 5 for this one.
Hey man, if you're over the 0, you're
I know.
All right.
Yeah, that's how I feel as well. Okay. Now how can we fix it, Paris?
Okay. For me, any plot that's formulaic just needs some adjustments, and Boice certainly has the talent to change it. But I think he wrote this way intentionally. To be like an episode of Happy Days, right? But like, that being said, there's plenty of TV shows out there that do not have horribly predictable and boring plot constructions. I think this could be improved by just taking just a step or two away from that Happy Days script and just leaning more into like Twin Peaks territory. I feel like because regardless of the supernatural stuff in Twin Peaks, it has a lot of great like crime and underworld stuff going on, and I feel like this could really benefit from sort of looking at it from that angle and not making everything so like, I'm gonna tell the journal, and then he just gets killed like 4 hours later. I don't know. It's just, some of this stuff was just real, just a little too too formulaic for me, too obvious. All right, that brings us to the end of our tale. Chris, do you wanna say goodbye to our listeners? Do you have any questions for me before we sail off to a happy day?
The only question I have is like, how did you feel by the time you got to the end of the 200 pages? Was this like overall a good book or a terrible? Like, where would you put this? What bin?
It's definitely not terrible because I think so much of the emotional introspection was really accurate and it was really wholesome. Like, except for the parts, right at the end, it's like, I'm gonna give you a hot shot, and like, okay, trust me, drugs or whatever.
Even the womanizing is weirdly wholesome, right? Where he's like, well, he treated me nice, and he was upfront, and like, honestly, like, I'd go to bat for the Fonz. Sure, you can hide out in my house for a while. My husband, I will explain everything. Listen, my ex-boyfriend's coming in here. He's a nice guy. Leave him alone.
Yeah, it's just surprising when you can take something as kind of like silly and stupid as Happy Days and make something that's like a real, I don't know, it has some gravitas to it. Like, even if it has all these dumb tropey hallmarks, like, oh, the Fonz was finally in love for the first time in his life, and like, this woman was finally free because she rode on a motorcycle. Like, that's all pretty stupid, and like, I don't like that. But the care that Boice gave to Richard's internal monologue and a lot of those descriptions, it really elevated it for me. And I'm like, you know what, this is a book. It booked well.
All right.
I just didn't like the plot at all. I think that might be a first for me. I don't think I've ever liked the writing in a book and hated everything else.
It's possible. It's possible. All right, Paris. Well, thank you for sharing Who Killed the Fonz with us. And thank you to our
Fred.
patrons and Ko-fi donors. Shout out to our lurkers on Patreon who aren't currently donating, but who still grace us with their watchful gaze, like 50, Anna, Anya, Arant, BB89, Carol, Caroline, Eldridge Nemo, George, Gray, Jan, Katie, Kristen, Last Man on Earth 01, Robin, Samantha, Throttle 19, and Zoe. And our paying patrons like our Bad Bookworms, Ben, Donnie, Emily, Jakob, Jared, Scott, and Will. Our exacting editors, Elliot, Xander, Kieran, David, D, Emmy, Funny Robot with Antennas, Greg, Harry 7, Martin, Root Beer Cutie, and the Ugly One. Our loathsome librarians like Veronica, Beast with the Least, Yanka, Luchek, Patricia, Julius, and of the Void, the taco-eating unicorn of the Hot Springs. And of course, our pesky publishers like Miles, Austin, Patrick, and Fred. Thank you especially, Fred, for this episode today. And of course, our Ko-fi donors like Mark, Tracy, our ever-faithful Kiwi Thing, and Excavating Lizard, along with Martin F. Brenna and Matthew, who relieved us of some terrible books. If you want some terrible books we've read for the show, you can buy them over on our Ko-fi page. All right, Paris, I'm off to sit on it.
I gotta say, man, Fred, thank you, because talk about something I never would have read. The show, we would have
There's
never
no
touched
way
this
in
book.
hell. We could have gone our whole entire lives walking right by this book every single time.
But, you know, I am looking forward to listening to that interview with Boice to hear his rationale behind doing this. And
I think Happy Days is stupid. I wanted to make it better because I can do it better because it's stupid.
I don't know. Anyway, I don't know. I'm now looking forward to reading something from Boice at some point in life because clearly has a talent with the written word.
All right. Well, thanks again, Paris, and I'll see you later.
All right. Bye, Chris.
Sit on it.
Spin. Thank you for listening to another episode of Terrible Book Club. Terrible Book Club is an independent podcast produced by your hosts, Paris and Chris. Sound design and audio editing by Chris, with sound effects and music by Epidemic Sound and sometimes also Chris. Our theme song is Kiss by Yearn, which is, you guessed it, actually also Chris. You can find more of his soothing synthy sounds on Bandcamp at yearn.bandcamp.com. Do you want us to review a book of your choice on the show? Do you want access to some extra audio-visual weirdness? If so, become a patron at patreon.com/terriblebookclub. If you'd like to send us a one-time tip instead, you can do that at ko-fi.com/terriblebookclub. You can also support TBC for free by sharing the show on social media, following our accounts on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or Goodreads, telling your friends about your favorite episode, or by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, or anywhere else on the internet. To send us book recommendations or your adorable pet photos, send an email to terriblebookclub@gmail.com.